Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ade Solanke. As Franz mentioned in his introduction, my project is Spora Stories, Diaspora Spora, and my whole work is around the Afro-Spora, which is how we've kind of dubbed ourselves. 54 African nations, sorry, 55, the African diaspora, the AU recognises us as a legitimate part of the African family. So I speak from that perspective. I'm UK-based, born in West London, Ladbroke Grove, Notting Hill, made famous by the film. And I'm working around film and theatre with a specific focus on the diaspora. Both my parents are Nigerian. Anyone called Ade, you know now, is from Nigeria, Yoruba. And I visited Nigeria. My first job ever was with a Nigerian company based in London. So I've always had in my work as a journalist and my work as a dramatist a connection to the continent. It's actually my first time, however, in Austria, so I'm really happy to be here, and your city is absolutely gorgeous, Vienna. I'm in love. So, can the creative industries help Africa flourish? If so, how so? That's our topic. And as Francis said, I'm going to respond to it, not with the global overview that Mike masterfully delivered, but with very specific reference to Nollywood, or Nigerian popular cinema. Lots of Nigerians don't actually like the term Nollywood. We won't discuss that. But we're talking about the very prolific, quite particular, and absolutely extraordinary creative industry around specifically Nigerian film. We call it film. It's not cinema, as you may not know, mainly DVD or video formats, but moving in the direction of cinema, and we'll think about that a little bit as I move along. So I want to look at this question with reference to the specific creative industry, but also with reference to something that caught my eye on the website when I was doing some research on the organisation, the reference to social processes of transformation. So Nollywood I'm looking at in terms of this idea of creative industries as a motor for development, all the things that Mike has mentioned, but also I'm interested particularly in a way we can help social transformation and develop social justice. We need, and maybe some of my things will repeat your point. Obviously, creative industry is everywhere. I can put on my European hat, I can put on my African hat. In each of those contexts, we want creative industries to contribute to economic prosperity and to help create growth. But for me, if that is all they do, I think we're missing a really important contribution they can make to this idea of social transformation. And with reference to Nollywood, it's particularly important that this transformation can be, in the African context, can be helped by this form, which is about Africans seeing themselves centre stage. What I mean by that is transformation, I believe, comes about in part through new ways of seeing. And in fact, the new way of seeing itself, the new paradigm, must first be conceived and conjured up in thought and pictured and imagined before the actual material transformation can manifest in the physical world. So the mind's eye must first screen internally that new reality, and that's actually what Nollywood is doing. And quite spectacularly, quite almost accidentally, without a grand plan, without a government idea or support, this thing which has given us a view of ourselves very different to the view of the rest of the world. I know, obviously, the statistic Mike presented, quite right, and it's the vision that so many people, I know that's not you live in Africa, so you know the reality, but for so many people, the bad news is what Africa is about. We know differently, and many of you, our friends here, will know differently too. But what Nollywood has done has fought the war, the famine, the baby with the flies on its face, you know, the awful images that we grew up in London looking at. And luckily we had the images coming from home of weddings and naming ceremonies and family birthdays to counter that. You're nodding, you understand, to counter those horrible images. Nollywood now offers that to people who don't have family and friends, to supply them with the competing narrative of ordinary, normal Africa. And that's why Nollywood is so, for me, significant. In fact, I would say one of the most significant steps in African affairs since the decolonizations of the 60s, because it is that new picture. Africans are lapping it up from Cape Town to Cote d'Ivoire, from Harlem, when Nigerian Americans are doing their own brand of Nollywood, and to Hackney, where I live in East London. I grew up in West London, I moved to the other side. There's a thriving London Nollywood scene. And it's that thing of displacing the old image and centering the African image, in the African imagination, that is, again, so unique. And I don't know if we've fully really grasped how much of a difference that's made and will make over lunch, I was talking about a friend of mine. Her teenage daughter is 15. And along with the impetus that Nollywood, the audiovisual image, has, the impact of that, there's a pop landscape which has never existed, now exploding out of Nigeria. And we have teenagers in London who were born there, who've lived there all their lives, like my friend's 15-year-old daughter, Azaria, who are into artists like D'banj. I don't know if anyone's heard of D'banj. He's a British-born artist who went to Nigeria because he couldn't get his music through in England, and is now in the States touring with Kanye West. He signed up to his record label and is, making a huge impact as a British African artist. But he's actually operating within the Nigerian frame. He went back to Nigeria and became a Nigerian cultural artist. So that's fundamental to me. The new picture, or the new pictures Nollywood is offering, are actually made by people who aren't particularly interested in social transformation. They're interested in money, in commerce. They're marketeers. And as Mark might alluded to, the way in which piracy is such an issue in Nigerian film is because the business is really about just making money. And there are lots of dynamics to that, and I'll touch on that later. But the people who are making Nollywood aren't particularly interested in nation building. But their work, again, inadvertently is having an impact way beyond their purpose in making it. It is a transformation. And I would say that Nollywood has already spread a new story culture around the world. Again, stories with Africans at their center, not the help, not the best friend, but the main character, the stars. And I think in addition to that, it can spread a new culture. I recently wrote an article about my work in the UK Writer magazine, and I called it Winds of Change, which is obviously picking up on, I think it was Macmillan who used the term around the period of decolonization. Because that cultural winds of change, for me, can bring in a new state of mind, let's say, transforming nation states by inducing a new mental state of mind. Now, I'm not arguing that Nollywood today is doing that. Some of you may have seen the films. They're genre-wise, mainly domestic dramas, marital comedies, that sort of thing. But who knows what 10 years from now Nollywood will be dealing with, and I'll say a little bit more about that. So just a few stats, a few figures to give you a picture. A recent report in a major Nigerian business journal called Business Day gave us the latest figures. Nollywood generated close to $800 million in the last 3 years. 800 million. That's from, again, Nigeria's Africa's most populous nation, 160 million. Growing middle class, but still 70% of the population live on less than $1 a day. I think that's roughly right. I think you quoted that. So 800 million from a country with that kind of profile is extraordinary. And a lot of that comes from the diaspora, but not enough because of the problems in terms of the distribution network. A couple of other stats. The global film industry, just to give you the bigger picture, the global film and entertainment industry generated 90 billion in 2010 and is projected to generate 102 billion in 2012. And most of the revenue from film and entertainment comes from theatrical distribution. We in Nigeria, and I keep taking off each hat. This is the Nigeria hat when I say we don't have anything like yet a theatrical distribution circuit. So to make 800 million without that, just imagine, the mind boggles once that machine side of it has been properly developed. The mind boggles as to what we'll do. North America dominates and takes the largest market share, 40% of that 90 billion that was made in 2010. Nollywood film revenue from Nollywood films is largely from home video through CDs, DVD releases, and cable and satellite broadcast. And this has been reduced because of the piracy, which is a scourge throughout the industry. In terms of numbers of films produced, I think that the numbers have been declining, but that's not a bad thing because the quality has also been increasing. But I think it's roughly 1,500. I'm not going to quote exactly these figures I've got here because I'm not sure if they're completely right, but I know it's around 1,500 are registered each year. 1,500 roughly are registered each year. And another interesting thing, again, connecting to that notion of social transformation, the percentages in 2010, 44% of those films were in English, 31% were in Yoruba, which is my parents' tongue, 24% were in Hausa, which is the community in mainly the north. The Yorubas live in the southeast-ish. The Hausa are in the north. And then 1% of those films were in Igbo language. So again, in terms of this regional identity, which we've been so lacking to an extent, I think that's quite good news. Okay, so the majority is still in English, but English is universally accessible for all the reasons I don't have to tell you. So is that good or bad? That's kind of what the topic of this question is. I would say yes in lots of ways. Nollywood is a big and growing business and can support all the sorts of things that Mike has mentioned, economic development, enhancing all sorts of business potential on the continent. But it has obviously caused displacement. And what's been interesting for me as I've engaged with Nollywood is talking to different filmmakers. Some people have been very ashamed of Nollywood. For many years, people would, quite a few Nigerian artists would their faces would twist when you mentioned Nollywood because the quality was so bad and they were embarrassed, effectively. And they wanted to renounce it and not have anything to do with Nollywood. But some of those people, I won't mention names, but some of the people who've been most, even up to 3 years ago, were very, very anti-Nollywood, are having to embrace it just because it is so powerful, as in its reach, its connectedness to the African audience throughout the continent and in the diaspora cannot be challenged at this point. And I say that because we've had African cinema and African film for decades, and we've had wonderful masters, Sembeni, Sulemani Sisse, wonderful, often from the Francophone tradition, people who've made brilliant films who are respected and revered, but it has to be said, mainly outside the continent, which isn't a reflection on their work, it's just a fact that Nollywood has done something they haven't done. It's connected to the home indigenous audience. It is loved at home. And there are only 3 film national cinemas that have achieved that, and you know the other 2, Nollywood, Hollywood, and Bollywood. Only 3 out of all the nations producing cinema have had that kind of relationship. Interestingly, each of those 3 have a huge diaspora, so that gives us an indication as to why and how they become so powerful. I don't want to dazzle you with too many statistics, but just a few points to do with the impact of Nollywood on the economy. As Mike has pointed out, there is a huge problem with unemployment, not just in Europe, but in Africa. And the creative industries obviously have the potential to generate income and to offer jobs. Nollywood actually employs up to 1 million people and is the largest employer after agriculture in Nigeria. 250,000 of those people are producers, directors, and actors, people directly hands-on involved in filmmaking. And then another thousands more who are involved in makeup, props, light, things like that, the actual ancillary occupations. Again, by way of comparison, Hollywood employs 164,000 people directly and 184,000 indirectly. So that's quite significant difference. The impact in terms of employment prospects for Nollywood, massively different. And overall, film is about 5% of Nigerian GDP. One thing that I found very interesting is that in terms of unexpected impacts on the economy, Nigerian architects are now apparently in demand all over the continent. Why? Because people who see the films have grown, almost it's an advert for the culture, have grown to like Nigerian architecture. I learned this summer. There's been a huge boom in demand for services for Nigerian architects, particularly in Kenya, because the people watching the films want to have homes built in the style that they've seen. So we've exported Nigerian culture accidentally, in the way in which Hollywood culture is also exported by the movies, but much more deliberately, I would say. New York is a tourist destination every time you see a Jennifer Aniston film, isn't it? So unexpected results as well as the obvious intended ones. But along with the measurable results, again, I'm interested in the cultural impact, if you like. I'm thinking in terms particularly of the conversations within African culture that these films are engendering. If you've seen Nollywood films, they are mainly melodramas, comedies, etc. But what about the genres that might again be spawned in time when the filmmakers of tomorrow get to work on their ideas? we could have biopics, we could have epics, in the way that Americans, I studied in America and lived there for a while, and Americans, as many of you may know, basically get a lot of their history from their movies. Movie Made America means the story of America is told to itself. The conversation is held through the movies. There may be a similar function for Nigerian and other African filmmaking in building a civic consciousness. When we talk about civic society, it doesn't just drop from the sky. It comes from the culture. And I think films can help engender that kind of civic and historical consciousness. And I actually ran a panel. There was a conference on African film in London at the University of Westminster. And I ran a program which was really, really, a group similar to this. We just discussed what are the roles that we'd like to see for people in African. It was actually particularly on African women. And we said, who would we want to see, memorialized in film? And there was the Nobel laureate who died recently. I can't remember her name. Wangui. She was a green environmentalist. Yes, thank you, absolutely. She was one of the hot favourites. Somebody like that, deserving of a tribute in celluloid, a monument to her work and a tribute to her greatness and her contribution to human development. So film can do that kind of thing. Records of the Mandelas, the Nkrumahs. I can't believe there isn't a film about Nkrumah. I was in Ghana around this time last year, and it's extraordinary. There's been small documentaries, but never a major, and I'm talking about something like JFK or, the sorts of films, the big blockbusters that really celebrate and document their fictions, their entertainments, but they're also records of work that's been done. I want to see African films doing that. I think Nollywood can become the machine that helps us develop that. Conversations about our leaders, our heroes, our sheroes, but also about our past and about our future. And also, importantly, conversations with the rest of the world. Because, as we all, again, will be familiar with the fact that the dialogue is not an equal one between North and South. Nollywood films, African films can help create a dialogue. And again, it's about building states of mind, new states of mind, Africans and non-Africans and Europeans and other parts of the world. Some of the challenges Nollywood faces, production standards, those of you who've seen the films, Mike will know, remain very low. Films are made very quickly and very cheaply, roughly 5 weeks in total. Budget's roughly $40,000, depends. Very few films are made in studios. Again, I worked in Hollywood, so I was on the lot at Disney, I was on the lot at Sony, and you're working in an environment which is, it's like a machine for filmmaking. The way I found out just recently, the way many of the films, Nollywood films, get the locations they're actually shot in, is by literally going around and knocking on doors and saying to people, and saying to people, can we use your home or your office or your factory for this scene? So if the person you've asked says, no, we're busy, you drive on with your cast to the next it's extraordinary. But this is the gumption and the chutzpah that's made Nollywood so great. We've got to applaud that level of diligence and application, but I think we need studios. I think a little bit of, again, thinking about creative industries, a little bit of the industrialization of this sector would probably help develop things. Amaka Igwe is a very well-known filmmaker, and she has her own studio. She produces films and TV shows, very successful. But the standard mode of production is very much like early Hollywood, small-scale, cottage industry-type productions, with people driving from location to location. So we need studios. We need theatrical exposure. The loss of potential revenue from the lack of a theatrical distribution circuit, i.e. cinema houses, has been estimated by the World Bank at around 200 million. And that's the loss, in places like the loss of potential earnings in somewhere like North America. So imagine the loss globally would be 4 times that. And this is according to World Bank estimates. We need more theatres. Just to give you a picture, most of the social viewing is done in what are called video parlours. They're basically small spaces, people gather, smaller than this, and watch the films, and they pay a couple of dollars, or the equivalent of a couple of dollars. No, sorry, they pay a couple of dollars if they purchase the DVD, and they pay the equivalent of 25 cents if they go to watch in a communal setting. Not good enough. Most of the films go directly to video stores, And the average Nollywood film sells about 30 to 40,000. A blockbuster Nollywood film sells about 500,000, 500,000. So rentals are the biggest business, but the income that is generated by that form of distribution it pales into insignificance compared to what theatrical distribution can do. There are other things that are weaknesses, but only one other thing I'll mention is weak stories. Actually, I have to mention piracy, because without proper distribution, nobody really wants to invest. And so again, the cottage industry mode of production is reinforced because the big investment that can lead to those bigger films, which can lead to proper distribution, you cannot guarantee your income with the level of piracy that is prevalent in that sector. So we really need to have a regulatory environment that ensures investors can recoup their investment and make a profit. So some of the solutions are to do with the creative industries, the development of creative industries thinking in Nigeria. And just before I go on to what is being done, I've been thinking about this whole topic in terms of industrialized creativity, reversing the creative industries wording into that notion of industrialized creativity. We already have commercialized creativity, because anyone who's been to West Africa knows, and I'm sure other parts of Africa, the fundamental muscle in Nigeria, for example, is a commercial one. There's a bone or a muscle that people seem to be born with. Every other person you meet is a businessman or a businesswoman. It's just like, what are you doing? I'm a businessman. And it's a joke, because it's, it's as it is. So we've already got the commercialized creativity as a notion, but the industrialized creativity is, I think, the next stage in our development. So anyway, what's being done in terms of the creative industries response? There's actually a body called the Bank of Industry, which is focusing more and more on creative work. The Bank of Industry is, I was introduced to it over London. I took part in, over the summer, the Olympics were massive in London. And I was part of a literature panel organized by this organization, the Bank of Industry, to do with the development of Nigerian literature. But they also have a program to do with film-related projects. On distribution, very exciting. I met somebody they funded to develop a circuit of cinemas. The project is called Filmhouse. And he's a very dynamic man who was previously employed in London running the Odeon, which is one of our major chains of cinemas. So that's already underway. They're opening cinemas in the next couple of months, rolling out cinemas in the next year. So we'll have changes very quickly. Bank of Industry investing also in higher standards, higher creative standards, by co-financing projects like Half of a Yellow Sun. I don't know if it's been translated into a very well-known best-selling novel, which is going to be a film co-financed with the British film industry. They also have a loan scheme, and interestingly, are helping to develop film schools. Now, I was part of a British Council initiative to Lagos, the Pan-African University project, where I was part of a team teaching screenwriting. Brilliant writers, fantastic ideas, great stories. And I think now that investment will pay off in terms of more and more trained screenwriters. Very, very quickly, I'd be interested in the kinds of stories that filmmakers in Nigeria think are the commercial ones that will have that kind of global impact. Will it be selling out if they do remakes of American films or remakes of Chinese films? I don't think so. As long as we still have work that has the cultural integrity and connectedness, again, to the lived lives of African, the original and primary audience. They're also investing in the industrialized mode of production, initiatives to build media studios and media hubs. There are a few in the eastern part of Nigeria, and a few are being developed in Lagos. I've been told I've only got another couple of minutes. Just very, very quickly, on the on the diaspora contribution, I very much see myself as part of this whole energy. I'm happy to have been born and raised in England. It was a brilliant experience in lots of ways, but we didn't have a presence. It's as simple as that. We were almost invisible and still are to a large extent. So it's just brilliant for us to see African stories and Africans center stage in stories. I'm a writer. My play, Franz mentioned, my first stage play, luckily, has done quite well. So hopefully myself and others are changing that landscape and contributing the British African story. I think Spora Stories are essentially, my project is called Spora Stories, they're essentially Africans abroad stories, fish out of water stories. Everyone can relate to that experience of being in and out of a culture. So it seems to me that there's a universal theme with a level of migration that's happening in the world today. The diaspora story connects not just in terms of the African experience. Finally, where is the line between a globalized sellout and the preservation of cultural diversity? I say this because it was one of the questions that Fran sent to me. Two films that were on over the last few months in London, two Nollywood films, seem to connect to that question quite interestingly. One was made for an international, i.e. European North American market, and it used English throughout. The other film was made in the three main Nigerian languages, Yoruba, Hausa, and Igbo. It did really, really well in the London African scene. Now, it's not necessarily the case that it would also travel and connect well to the, if you like, non-African scene. But I actually think the more there's integrity and authenticity, the more uniqueness and more flavor you bring to the work. So I would actually say there's perhaps more mileage commercially in the preservation of individual cultural diversity. That's my particular belief. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to throw some, or to pick out some aspects of both of your presentations and, yes, comment on them a little bit. First of all, what I think was highly interesting in both of your presentations was the notion of the market as a tool of emancipation. We've seen this before historically, and it's coming back in different cultural areas, also in the European one. And I think it's a very interesting thing, but yeah, it has to be handled with care. We all are aware of it, and you mentioned it with Hollywood and, this kind of globalized pictures that are going on, and also with Nollywood when they're already spreading out to other African countries. But I still think that the idea is worth being discussed also in Europe, I think, where public expenditure for the arts is cut down everywhere we see. And another thing I also wanted to add, also linked a little bit to the UNESCO Convention on Cultural Diversity, is that the creative industries, or the cultural and creative industries, are offering, or are offering products that have a much lower threshold for reception or consumption, as you mentioned it with films, and this kind of social transformation via new images, via images at all, via pop images, images coming out of the pop culture, which is highly important, I think. And I think this is a public you only reach, well, not at all, or with very high difficulties with the elitist arts. And we also, because I know there's always this kind of tendency to bash the cultural and creative industries, but I still think they have quite an important potential when it comes to the public. And commercialization, well, I know it's quite bad, and all the problems that are coming with this concept. But still, don't forget about the public. And I think, above all, in Western Europe, where we have always had this, or always in the last 50 years at least, or 40 years, we had a arts funding system very much focused onto production. And so the whole consumption side got a little bit out of sight, I would say. And I think the whole discourse of cultural and creative industries are offering also the chance to look at the public once again that we've lost a little bit. But another thing is when it comes to the economic potential of the cultural and creative industries, above all when it comes to jobs, well, as we all know, the cultural and creative industries in Europe turned out to be a big deception in terms of job creation. It creates employment, but it doesn't create so much well-paid jobs. But it's just on the opposite. I think via this discourse on the cultural about cultural and creative industries, we really see an enormous shift now, where this kind of intrinsic motivation that has always been part of the arts field is now shifted towards a big, towards the normal labor market. And I think this is a highly dangerous development we're seeing there. And so I know that the situation in the African countries is completely different, and you've mentioned it, of course, but I think there's a big risk when it comes to job creation. Another thing was, Mike, when you mentioned this, that democracy and freedom, is not so necessary for economic growth. I think that exchange is the fundamental base for all kinds of creativity, whether it's in the artistic field or in the cultural and creative industries. But this is a kind of fundamental requirement in order to create sustainable cultural and creative industries, or cultural and artistic field. And it might be the exchange of ideas or the exchange of people. And I think, above all, in Europe, which is threatening most the cultural and creative industries, are the strict immigration laws we are faced with. So I think freedom is necessary for creativity or for the arts. Another thing which is also highly important, and Ade, you just mentioned it, is infrastructure. Infrastructure for production, like hubs, like media houses, digital backbones, but also infrastructure for distribution, as you mentioned it with the cinemas. And I think this is very important, and we must not neglect this fact that without any kind of infrastructure, you won't be able to create and you won't be able to distribute. And yeah, now I'm coming already to the next point of distribution. Everywhere, the distribution for cultural and creative industries, or this change when it comes from a local to a international, I'm not speaking of a global scale, but at least of an international. I think their cultural and creative industries everywhere have more or less the same problem, unless you have a historically grown, very old structure, such as Hollywood, such as classical music in Vienna, which has been actively built up for over 150 years, and that's what it takes. So, and I think, yeah, well, we don't have to be, it needs quite a lot of patience also. Because there's a lot of infrastructure behind this kind of big distribution backbones. Yes, and well, two points I still wanted to add. One was the infrastructure point, and the other thing is well, the more serious studies about cultural and creative industries show is that those are areas that are flourishing there where the education system is, is good. So what you need first is a good education system. And I think this could be quite, well, you also could use it again as a kind of Trojan horse, you see, this hype of the cultural and creative industries for other, maybe more important needs like education. And as a very last point, the piracy issue. Of course, I see the problem, as you mentioned it, both in Africa, certainly. But I think, on the other hand, you also see, because, well, when we're looking at the Western context, you see there that more and more severe intellectual property regimes are hindering creativity. And I think this is endangering it. On the other hand, you can open it up too far so that people don't earn anything at all because of piracy, or you can close it down that nothing comes out any longer. So it's always this question of balance, as it is also with this kind of a market solution. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. You have 3 minutes to comment on one of the or two things. With many things, I think we agree, but you have the chance before I give to the floor.
Just very quickly. I mean, your last point was something I actually had mentioned in my piece, in my presentation, but I knew I was running on.
I'm guilty, yeah.
No, you're right, I overdid it. But I'm really interested in that whole issue because I referred to my experience working in Hollywood on the lot in studios. And as I was thinking through this in terms of industrialization of, you know, Nollywood, the machine does start to change the product, obviously. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when I was at Disney in Burbank, and Disney is an amazing place. It's like you know, Disney. It's like going to Disneyland. You go into the lot. The lot is the facility, and there are 7 dwarfs. That's the thing. You go through a structure with the 7 dwarfs, and the word that underneath is the sentence: "Reality ends here," and that says a huge amount, doesn't it? We all know Disney is obviously part of the dream machine, but you're entering into a codified environment with very clear rules, very strictures and controls. So that whole freewheeling, buccaneering dynamic, the Wild West of production is gone. Mm-hmm. And it's a corporate machine, obviously. It's designed to maximize profits, which is great because you want to develop more, increase your revenue. But then what's the price of that is essentially the question I was asking myself. The conformism is inevitable, so you'll have good and bad effects. The extent to which you're monetizing your creativity will also perhaps, maybe invariably and inevitably, deplete some of the creativity possibly. That was something I wanted to throw out as maybe something to discuss.
Okay, Mike, there is a comment from your side, or reaction.
Maybe just two questions, two notions of clarity. I wouldn't have said that we need to emphasize the market, because I don't believe that. In fact, I think the market is the problem. What we've done is we've so emphasized the market and the creative industries that we've kind of devalued the arts. In fact, at the end, what I was saying was, I believe that there are these three kinds of practices within the arts, and creative industries is only one aspect, and they kind of require a market, and for them that's fine. I've got no problem with them. But then there are others who don't have the money to pay, but they still would need to have access to the arts. And then there are those where art for its own sake. So I believe in a very different, a more kind of mixed economy approach to the arts. I think secondly, also just to clarify, I wouldn't have said, I don't think, because I don't believe that either, that democracy is not really necessary for creativity. I did say that I don't think, there were some people who were saying that democracy is not needed for economic growth because of what's happening in China and the like. However, having said that, I still do think that democracy is not necessarily for creativity, because I know from my own kind of experience during the days of apartheid, where there was censorship and so on, people were incredibly creative. In fact, quite often in conditions of repression, people are at their most creative, both in terms of creating product and distributing it as well. Of course, we don't want to say, now let's have repression in order for us to be creative, but I get your point.
I think you'll never get to the point to really extinct it. But,
sure, absolutely.
A certain amount of freedom certainly will help.
Sure.
And I think just very quickly, you're absolutely right. As we say we want more theatrical distribution, that will exclude huge numbers of the audience in Nigeria. The 70% who are earning less than $1 a day won't be able to go to those upscale, very expensive venues. So the revenue will increase, but access will be affected.
Yes.
Which is exactly the shift that has happened with our cultural policy. In 1994, those of us involved in the creation of post-apartheid cultural policy premised it on access, everyone shall have access. But the shift to creative industries has in fact meant that those with disposable income have more access than those who don't. So in fact, those who were excluded under apartheid continue to be excluded now.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Cultural and creative industries are a very interesting concept, and you can use it for many purposes and in many ways. But you never have to forget that it's about making money. That's the main goal.